She defied her father to save her family. What she did is heroic. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Fiona Lancaster stared at her reflection in the gilded mirror, the echo of raised voices still lingering from the dining room below. The argument with her father had been the most explosive yet. Something inside her had finally broken free, something she couldn't contain any longer. Her fingertips traced the edge of her pearl necklace, a 16th birthday gift from her father, now feeling like a shackle rather than adornment. Born into wealth and privilege in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, she had everything money could buy, but was beginning to realize what it couldn't. The reflection showed a young woman with troubled eyes that had witnessed too much cruelty, masked as business decisions. Just yesterday, Mr. Reynolds had been fired after 22 years as her father's chauffeur. His crime? Requesting a week off to care for his sick daughter. Fiona had seen the man walk to his car, shoulders hunched, with the weight of uncertainty, wondering how he would afford his daughter's medical treatment without health insurance. She turned away from the mirror, unable to face herself. The Lancaster name opened doors throughout Chicago, but lately she'd begun to question the foundation upon which her family's empire was built. Her father, George Lancaster, had transformed a modest manufacturing business into Lancaster Industries, one of the Midwest's largest employers. But at what cost? The newspapers celebrated his business acumen while carefully avoiding mention of the human toll. The workers discarded when they became inconvenient. The young mothers terminated when pregnancy interfered with productivity. The poverty wages that kept families struggling despite working full-time. A soft knock at her bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Fiona." It was Rosa, their housekeeper for over 15 years, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father is asking for you in his study." Fiona sighed, straightening her posture. "Thank you, Rosa. I'll be down in a moment." The older woman lingered, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "Be careful with your words, Nina. Your father is not in a good mood." The unspoken warning hung between them. Fiona had witnessed Rosa's own daughter being denied a job at Lancaster Industries simply because she was a single mother. The injustice of it all burned in her chest. "Don't worry about me, Rosa," Fiona said, her resolve hardening. At 22, fresh out of Northwestern University with a business degree she had fought for against her father's wishes for a suitable education in the arts, she was ready to stand her ground. "I think it's time someone spoke truth to power in this house." The walk down the sweeping staircase felt like a march to battle. The Lancaster mansion, with its soaring ceilings and imported marble, had never felt like a home. More like a museum, where emotions were exhibits kept behind glass, never to be touched or expressed. Tonight, she would shatter that glass. Her father's study door was ajar, warm lamplight spilling into the hallway. George Lancaster sat behind his mahogany desk, a tumbler of whiskey in one hand, ledgers spread before him. A king surveying his kingdom, tallying its worth in dollars rather than lives. "You wanted to see me?" Fiona's voice was steadier than she expected. George looked up, his silver hair catching the light. "Close the door." She did as instructed, then remained standing, rather than taking her usual seat across from him. "I've been informed that you visited the West Side plant today," he began, his tone measured but threaded with steel. "Care to explain what you were doing interfering with personnel matters?" Fiona lifted her chin slightly. "I wasn't interfering. I was observing." "Observing?" He took a slow sip of whiskey. "My foreman tells me you were speaking with workers about their wages, about their grievances." The last word dripped with disdain. "Someone should be listening to them," she countered. "Maria Gonzalez has worked on the assembly line for 12 years and can't afford her son's asthma medication. Kevin Dubois Lost his apartment last month because the rent increased, but his salary hasn't changed in 3 years. And Sarah... Enough! George slammed his glass down, whiskey sloshing over the rim. This is not some charity, Fiona. This is business. My business. The business that pays for this house, your education, the clothes on your back. Maybe I'd prefer fewer cashmere sweaters if it meant the people who make them could feed their families, she shot back. Her father's eyes narrowed. You've been filled with these ideas since college. I knew sending you there was a mistake. You were supposed to find a suitable husband, not radical notions about social justice. Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks. Is that what you wanted? For me to be an ornament on some businessman's arm? Someone to host dinner parties and look pretty at galas while he destroys lives like you do? The silence that followed was deadly. George Lancaster rose slowly from his chair, his face a mask of cold fury. You have no idea what it takes to build something from nothing. My father worked himself to death in a factory, not unlike mine. I swore my children would never know that struggle. His voice was low, controlled. Everything I've done has been for this family. Family? Fiona laughed bitterly. When was the last time we acted like one? When Mother was alive, or even before then? The mention of her mother, dead 7 years now from cancer, sent a visible flinch across her father's features. Elizabeth Lancaster had been the softness to George's hard edges, the compassion to his ruthless pragmatism. With her gone, there had been nothing to temper his worst impulses. You're young, he said finally. Idealistic. The world doesn't reward idealism, Fiona. It rewards strength and strategic thinking. Is that what you call firing Mrs. Kennedy after 20 years because she needed time off to care for her dying husband? Strategic thinking. He waved a dismissive hand. Business decisions can't be made with sentiment. They can be made with humanity, she insisted, stepping closer to his desk. With conscience. George's jaw tightened. I've indulged your rebellious phase long enough. It's time you took your place in this family. I'm appointing you to the board next month. You'll have a say in how things are run, but you'll learn quickly that the bottom line is what matters. Fiona felt a chill run through her. This was her father's way of bringing her to heel, giving her just enough power to feel complicit, but not enough to effect real change. And if I refuse? Her father's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. Then perhaps it's time you experienced life without the Lancaster name opening doors for you, without the Lancaster fortune cushioning your falls. The threat hung in the air between them. Disinheritance, being cut off. Fiona had never lived without privilege, had never had to worry about paying bills or finding housing. The thought was terrifying, and yet oddly freeing. Maybe that would be for the best, she said softly. At least then I could look at myself, in the mirror. As she turned to leave, her father called out, his voice suddenly tired. You're so much like her sometimes. The same fire, the same stubborn heart. A pause. It will break you just as it broke her. Fiona froze, hand on the doorknob. Elizabeth Lancaster had died of cancer, but her spirit had been crushed long before the disease took her body, crushed by years of witnessing her husband's callousness, of being powerless to change him. No, Fiona said, not turning around. I won't let it. As she closed the door behind her, she made a silent promise to herself and to her mother's memory. She wouldn't be broken. She would find a way to honor her father's legacy while transforming it into something worth preserving, something that served people rather than using them, something her mother would have been proud of. The battle lines had been drawn, and Fiona Lancaster was ready for war. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. Rosa found Fiona the next morning, in the garden, sitting on the stone bench beneath the willow tree, her mother's favorite spot. The housekeeper approached cautiously, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. "You did not sleep," Rosa observed, offering the cup. It wasn't a question. Fiona accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "I've been thinking all night about your father's offer." Rosa settled beside her, her work-worn hands folded in her lap. News travelled quickly below stairs. Fiona sometimes wondered if the staff knew more about the Lancaster family dynamics than the Lancasters themselves did. "It's not an offer, Rosa. It's an ultimatum." Fiona took a sip of coffee, letting its warmth spread through her. "Join the board, keep quiet, and eventually become just like him, or leave with nothing." Rosa's eyes, dark and knowing, studied Fiona's face. "And what will you choose, Nina?" "I don't know yet." Fiona stared out at the garden her mother had lovingly designed. Elizabeth Lancaster had insisted on planting wildflowers among the cultivated roses, saying nature's beauty shouldn't be restricted to what humans deemed worthy. "Either way, I lose something precious." "Perhaps," Rosa said carefully. "There is a third path." Fiona turned to her. "What do you mean?" "What do?" "Your father sees only two options, because that is how powerful men think, victory or defeat. But women—" Rosa smiled slightly. "Women have always found ways to survive between these extremes." Before Fiona could ask her to elaborate, the garden gate opened, and Geoffrey Williams, her father's personal assistant, entered. His expression was apologetic but insistent. "Miss Lancaster, your father has asked me to bring you these." He held out a leather portfolio. "The board meeting agenda for next week and some background on the company's current projects." Fiona hesitated before taking the portfolio. "He's assuming I've made my decision." Geoffrey adjusted his glasses nervously. "He suggested I remind you that the Henderson Gala is tonight, and he expects you to accompany him. Several important clients will be there." "Of course," Fiona replied, her tone cool. "Heaven forbid the Lancaster image be tarnished by my absence." After Geoffrey retreated, Rosa stood to leave as well, but paused. "Your mother used to say that true strength isn't found in winning fights, but in choosing which ones are worth fighting." With that, she left Fiona alone with her thoughts and the portfolio. Inside were financial reports, project proposals, and employee productivity assessments, the cold, hard numbers that her father used to justify his decisions. But as Fiona flipped through the pages, she noticed something else: patterns of inefficiency, wasteful spending on executive perks, and a disturbing reliance on frequent staff turnover rather than employee development. Her business education hadn't been what her father intended. While he'd expected her to learn how to maximize profits at any cost, she'd focused on sustainable business practices and ethical leadership. She'd studied companies that thrived while treating workers fairly, that saw employee well-being as an investment rather than an expense. As she pored over the documents, a plan began to form in her mind. What if she did join the board, not as her father's puppet, but as an agent of change from within? She could gather allies, build a case for reform, and potentially transform Lancaster Industries without destroying it. The question was whether she could navigate such treacherous waters without losing herself in the process. That evening, Fiona stood before her closet, facing yet another decision. For the Henderson Gala, she could choose the red silk gown her father had bought her, a statement of Lancaster prosperity, or the simple black dress she'd purchased with her own money from her modest trust fund allowance. She chose the black dress, When she descended the staircase, her father waited in the foyer, immaculate in his tuxedo. His eyes registered her choice of attire, his mouth tightening almost imperceptibly. "The car is waiting," was all he said. The ride to the gala was silent, tension filling the space between them. Chicago's skyline glittered through the windows, a testament to ambition and progress, and to the disparity between those who built the city and those who reaped its rewards. The Henderson Hotel ballroom was already crowded when they arrived. Chicago's elite mingling over champagne and carefully crafted canapes. George Lancaster immediately transformed, his stern demeanor replaced by practiced charm as he greeted business associates and city officials. Ah, the Lancasters! Harold Peterson, one of her father's oldest friends and a board member, approached them with a broad smile. "George, that acquisition deal you proposed is brilliant, and Fiona, lovely as always. I hear congratulations are in order, joining the board at last." Fiona managed a polite smile. "Nothing's been decided yet, Mr. Peterson." Now, don't be modest. It's about time we had some young blood at the table, though I hope you won't push too many of your progressive ideas." He chuckled, but his eyes were evaluating, calculating. "I believe good business and good ethics aren't mutually exclusive," she replied steadily. Harold's smile faltered slightly. "Yes, well, idealism is the luxury of youth, isn't it?" He turned back to her father. "George, Senator Williams was asking about you. Shall we?" As her father moved away, Fiona found herself alone at the edge of the crowd. She watched as powerful men made deals over handshakes, as wives and daughters were paraded like accessories. This was the world she'd been born into, a world where human worth was measured by bank accounts and business connections. "You look like you're planning a jailbreak." The voice came from beside her, amused and surprisingly friendly. Fiona turned to find a man about her age, his smile genuine, unlike most in the room. "Gabriel Martinez," he introduced himself, offering his hand. "Recently hired at Everett Consulting. Still trying to figure out which fork to use at these things." Despite herself, Fiona smiled, shaking his hand. "Fiona Lancaster, and I've been attending these events my entire life and still couldn't tell you." "Lancaster?" His eyebrows raised slightly. "As in Lancaster Industries?" She tensed, ready for the usual response, subtle maneuvering for connection or advantage. "My father's company, yes." Gabriel surprised her by grimacing sympathetically. "That must be a lot of pressure." "I interned at Lancaster last summer in the R&D department. Interesting work, but the culture was intense." Something in his tone caught her attention. "Intense how?" He hesitated, glancing around as if making sure they weren't overheard. "Let's just say there wasn't much room for questioning the status quo. I suggested a project that would have reduced waste and improved working conditions on the factory floor. Got shut down immediately because it would have temporarily reduced productivity." He shrugged. "Business as usual, I suppose." "It doesn't have to be," Fiona said, more to herself than to him. Gabriel studied her with newfound interest. "You know, I've heard rumors about the boss's daughter, that she's nothing like him, that she actually cares about the people behind the profit margins." Before Fiona could respond, she felt a firm hand on her elbow. Her father had returned. "Fiona, come meet the Whitmores. They're considering a major contract with us." His eyes flicked dismissively to Gabriel. "Excuse us, young man." As she was led away, Fiona glanced back at Gabriel, who gave her a small, understanding nod. Something about that brief exchange left her feeling less alone in her convictions. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and small talk. Fiona played her part, smiling at the right moments, making pleasant conversation. But inside, her mind was racing, crystallizing the plan that had begun to form earlier that day. Late that night, after returning home, Fiona sat at her desk with a legal pad and pen. She began to list names, people inside Lancaster Industries who might share her concerns, board members who might be persuaded, external allies who could provide support or expertise. Gabriel Martinez went on the list. His insight into the R&D department could prove valuable. Next, she drafted a proposal, not the radical overhaul she might have wished for, but a series of measured changes that could improve workers' lives while maintaining the company's profitability. Healthcare benefits for all employees, gradual wage increases tied to company performance, parental leave policies, employee development programs. It was 3 a.m. when she finally put down her pen, exhausted but resolute. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she knocked on her father's study door. "Come in," he called, sounding surprised by the early visit. Fiona entered, portfolio in hand, and took a seat across from him without waiting to be asked. "I'll join the board," she stated clearly. A smile of satisfaction began to form on her father's face, but she held up a hand to stop whatever he was about to say. "But I won't be silent. I won't be a rubber stamp for policies I believe are wrong. I'll fight for changes that I think will make Lancaster Industries stronger and more sustainable." She placed her proposal on his desk, starting with these. George Lancaster's expression darkened as he glanced at the document. "You think you can waltz in and overturn decades of business practice? Based on what? A few college courses and some bleeding heart sentimentality? Based on sound business principles and contemporary research," Fiona countered. "Did you know that companies with fair wage practices and good benefits have lower turnover, higher productivity, and better long-term growth? That treating workers, well, isn't just moral, it's profitable." Her father leaned back in his chair, regarding her with a mixture of irritation and reluctant interest. "And you think the board will support these innovations? I think I can make a compelling case, and I think some of them already know that change is coming, whether Lancaster Industries leads it or gets left behind." George was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on his desk. Finally he spoke, his voice measured. "You'll need to present a full financial analysis, impact projections, implementation timelines." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Fiona felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. "I'll have it ready before the board meeting," she promised. As she stood to leave, her father called after her, an unfamiliar note in his voice, something almost like respect, or perhaps concern. "Fiona, the corporate world isn't kind to idealists. They'll try to eat you alive." She paused at the door, looking back at him. "Then it's a good thing I'm a Lancaster. We don't go down easily, do we?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, we certainly don't." The week that followed was the most intense of Fiona's life. She practically lived in her father's home office, poring over company records, researching industry standards and building her case. She reached out to contacts from university, seeking advice and information. She even arranged a discreet meeting with Gabriel Martinez, whose insider knowledge of the company's operations proved invaluable. And all the while, she watched her, father watching her, evaluating, measuring, perhaps even reconsidering who his daughter truly was. The night before the board meeting, Rosa brought her dinner in the office, finding Fiona surrounded by papers and spreadsheets. "You need to rest, Nina," the housekeeper said gently. "You cannot fight if you are exhausted." Fiona rubbed her eyes. "I can't stop now, Rosa. Tomorrow is everything." Rosa set down the tray and began gathering scattered papers, neatly organizing them. "Your mother was the same way, determined, stubborn." Her voice softened. "She would be proud of you, you know. But she would also tell you to sleep." At the mention of her mother, Fiona felt a pang of longing. How different might things have been if Elizabeth Lancaster had lived? Would her gentle influence have softened her husband's harsh business practices? Would she have supported her daughter's fight? "I miss her," Fiona whispered. "Especially now." Rosa squeezed her shoulder. "She is with you, in here." She touched Fiona's heart. "And tomorrow, when you speak to those important men in their expensive suits, she will give you strength." Fiona finally closed her eyes that night, on the edge of sleep. She thought she felt her mother's presence, a gentle reassurance that she was on the right path. Morning arrived too quickly, sunlight streaming through curtains she'd forgotten to close. As she dressed in her most professional outfit, a tailored navy suit, rather than one of the feminine dresses her father preferred, Fiona felt a calm determination replace her nervousness. This was her moment to stand for something that mattered. The Lancaster Industries boardroom was intimidating by design. All dark wood and leather, portraits of stern-faced former executives, all men, lining the walls. As board members filed in, their curious glances toward Fiona made it clear that her presence was unexpected. Her father entered last, nodding curtly in her direction before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Gentlemen," George Lancaster began, "before we address regular business, I've invited my daughter Fiona to present a proposal for your consideration. As you know, she will be joining the board officially next month, and this represents her first contribution to our discussions." Fiona rose, distributing copies of her proposal with steady hands. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. What I'm proposing isn't radical or revolutionary. It's a series of measured changes designed to strengthen Lancaster Industries' position for the future." For the next 20 minutes, she outlined her vision: healthcare coverage for all employees, not just executives, a graduated minimum wage increase that would actually allow workers to live above the poverty line, parental leave policy that wouldn't force new mothers to choose between their babies and financial survival, an employee development program to reduce turnover and build loyalty. "And here's the most important part," she said, turning to the final page of her presentation. "The financial projections showing that these changes would increase costs by only 3.8% in the first year, while potentially reducing turnover by up to 25% and increasing productivity by an estimated 12% within 3 years. The silence that followed her presentation was deafening. Harold Peterson was the first to speak, his tone deliberately patronizing. "This is all very idealistic, Miss Lancaster, but we run a business, not a charity." Fiona met his gaze steadily. "With respect, Mr. Peterson, this isn't charity. It's strategic investment in our most valuable resource, our people. Companies like Patagonia, Costco, and Ben & Jerry's have proven that ethical labor practices lead to stronger bottom lines and brand loyalty." Another board member, Richard Evans, leaned forward. "Your father built this company on certain principles. Miss Lancaster, are you suggesting those principles are flawed?" She could feel her father's eyes on her, watching how she would respond to this trap. Criticize him directly, and she would lose any chance of alliance. Backpedal, and she would lose credibility. "I'm suggesting that principles can evolve," she answered carefully. "My father built Lancaster Industries in a different era. Today's consumers and employees have different expectations. The companies that recognize and adapt to these changes will thrive. Those that don't may find themselves left behind." What happened next surprised everyone in the room, including Fiona. George Lancaster cleared his throat. "Miss Lancaster makes some valid points." All heads turned toward him in shock. "While I don't agree with all her proposals, her analysis of changing market conditions is sound. Perhaps it's time we re-evaluate certain policies." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. If George Lancaster himself was willing to consider these ideas, the other board members could hardly dismiss them outright. "I move that we form "A committee to review these proposals in detail," said Martin Chen, the newest and youngest board member besides Fiona. "With Miss Lancaster's involvement, of course." Fiona caught the slight nod her father gave her, acknowledging her small victory while signaling that the real work was just beginning. This wasn't complete success, but it was an opening. A crack in the wall she could potentially widen. As the meeting continued with regular business, Fiona felt a mix of emotions. Pride in having made her case, determination to push further, and a new understanding of the complex man who was her father. For the first time, she glimpsed the possibility that he might not be her enemy in this fight, but perhaps a reluctant ally waiting to be convinced. After the meeting, board members filed out, some nodding respectfully to Fiona, others avoiding her eyes. Her father remained seated, reviewing notes, seemingly unaware of her presence. But as the last member left, he spoke without looking up. "That was well presented. Your mother would have been impressed." The unexpected praise and the mention of her mother caught Fiona off guard. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," he warned, finally meeting her eyes. "You've opened Pandora's box, Fiona. The committee will scrutinize every detail, every number, and even if they approve some watered-down version of your proposals, implementation will be an uphill battle." Fiona sat down across from him. "Why did you support me, even partially?" George sighed, suddenly looking older than his 62 years. "Because contrary to what you might think, I'm not blind to the changes happening in the business world. And because..." He hesitated. "Because your mother once made me promise that I would listen to you, really listen, when you were ready to speak." Fiona felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I won't let you down. Or her. See that you don't." His tone returned to its usual briskness. "The committee meets next week. Be prepared for much tougher questions than you faced today." As she left the boardroom, Fiona felt something she hadn't experienced in years. A tentative bridge forming between herself and her father, fragile but real. Whether it would strengthen or collapse in the coming battles remained to be seen. What she didn't know was that the most difficult challenges were yet to come, and from unexpected directions. The forces resistant to change within Lancaster Industries were powerful and deeply entrenched, and they were already mobilizing against her. As Fiona left the building, she spotted a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. "How did it go?" Gabriel asked, falling into step beside her as she walked toward her car. "Better than expected," she admitted, "but this is just the beginning." "The beginning of what exactly?" She stopped, considering her answer carefully. "Of making Lancaster Industries the kind of company my mother would have been proud of. The kind where people like Mrs. Kennedy and Mr. Reynolds aren't treated as disposable." Gabriel studied her face with quiet admiration. "You know they're not going to make it easy for you." "I'm counting on it," Fiona replied with a determined smile. "The things most worth doing rarely are." What she couldn't have anticipated was just how difficult that fight would become, or how it would transform not only Lancaster Industries, but Fiona herself. What will happen when Fiona's proposed changes begin to threaten not just company and culture, but the very power structure her father has built over decades? And as she delves deeper into Lancaster Industries' operations, what secrets might she uncover about the true cost of her family's wealth? The Lancaster mansion felt different that evening, less like a museum and more like a battlefield poised for combat. Fiona sensed the shift in atmosphere the moment she returned home, finding Rosa waiting anxiously in the foyer. "Your father has called a family dinner," the housekeeper whispered urgently. "Your cousin Gregory is here." Fiona's stomach tightened. Gregory Lancaster, her father's nephew and the company's chief financial officer, was no ally. At 35, he had spent his entire career cultivating his position as George's presumptive heir, only to be blindsided by Fiona's unexpected interest in the family business. When? Fiona asked, already knowing the answer. Now, there, waiting in the dining room. Rosa's eyes conveyed a silent warning. Be careful, Nina. Gregory arrived with many papers, and they have been talking privately for hours. Fiona squeezed Rosa's hand gratefully before squaring her shoulders and heading toward the dining room. The massive oak doors stood partially open, male voices drifting through. Her father's measured tones contrasted with Gregory's more animated objections. Financial suicide, Gregory was saying as Fiona entered. These proposals would reduce our quarterly profits by nearly 5%. Both men looked up at her arrival, Gregory's expression hardening while her father remained impassive. Ah, Fiona, George said, gesturing to her usual seat. We were just discussing your presentation this morning. I gathered that, she replied coolly, taking her place at the table. Hello, Gregory. I didn't realize you'd be joining us. Her cousin managed a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. When Uncle George mentioned your creative ideas for the company, I thought my financial expertise might be needed. Fiona noted the spreadsheets and documents scattered across the table where plates should have been. This wasn't a family dinner. It was an ambush. I've already addressed the financial implications in my proposal, she said, keeping her voice even. The initial investment would be offset by reduced turnover costs within 18 months. Gregory snorted. Based on what? Academic theories from liberal professors who've never run a real business. Based on case studies of companies that have successfully implemented similar policies, Fiona countered. And on Lancaster Industries' own data, our turnover rate is nearly double the industry average, costing us millions in training and lost productivity. George Lancaster watched this exchange with calculating eyes, saying nothing as the two younger family members circled each other verbally. The board has already approved a committee to review my proposals, Fiona continued. I assume that's why you're really here, Gregory. You're worried about what they might find when they start looking closer at our personnel practices. Gregory's face flushed with anger. I'm here because someone needs to protect this company from well-meaning but naive idealism. Uncle George built Lancaster Industries through tough decisions and fiscal discipline, not by coddling workers with expensive benefits packages they haven't earned. Haven't earned? Fiona's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. Do you have any idea how many of our employees work second jobs just to make rent? How many skip medical care because they can't afford it? People giving 20, 30 years of their lives to this company only to be discarded when they're no longer convenient. That's business, Gregory snapped. Not personal. It should be personal, Fiona insisted, turning to her father. You always taught me that Lancaster Industries was a family legacy. Doesn't that mean we have a responsibility to the people who make that legacy possible? George Lancaster finally spoke, his tone measured. Both of you make valid points. Gregory is right about the financial considerations. 5% is significant. Fiona felt her heart sink as Gregory's expression turned smugly triumphant. However, her father continued, Fiona's analysis of our turnover problem is accurate. It's been a concern of mine for some time. Gregory looked stunned. Uncle George, you can't seriously be considering— I'm considering all options, George interrupted firmly, which is why I've decided that both of you will serve on the committee reviewing these proposals. Both of us, Fiona and Gregory said in unison, equally horrified. George nodded, a gleam of something almost like amusement in his eyes. Yes. You'll work together to find a compromise that addresses both the humanitarian concerns Fiona has raised and the financial realities Gregory has highlighted. Silence fell over the dining room as the cousins absorbed this decree. It was a master stroke of management on George's part, forcing the two opposing viewpoints within his family to find common ground while maintaining his position as final arbiter. After Gregory left, storming out with barely concealed fury, Fiona confronted her father in his study. "You're setting me up to fail," she accused. "Gregory will sabotage every suggestion I make." George looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "If your ideas can't withstand opposition, perhaps they should fail." "That's not fair, and you know it. He has resources and connections I don't have access to." "Life isn't fair, Fiona. Business even less so." Her father closed the file he'd been reviewing. "Consider this your first real test. If you can convince Gregory or outmaneuver him, you might have what it takes to eventually lead Lancaster Industries. If not—" He left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. As Fiona turned to leave, frustrated and determined in equal measure, her father added something unexpected. "Your mother believed that leadership wasn't about imposing your will, but about finding paths where opposing forces could move forward together." He paused. "It was one of the many things I loved about her, even when I disagreed." The mention of her mother, twice in one day after years of near silence about her, left Fiona momentarily speechless. By the time she collected herself, the moment had passed. Her father already returned to his work, dismissing her with a gesture. That night, unable to sleep, Fiona called the one person she thought might understand her predicament. "Gabriel, it's Fiona Lancaster. I hope it's not too late to call." "Fiona?" He sounded surprised but not displeased. "No, it's fine. How did the board meeting go?" She explained the mixed result, the committee formation, her cousin's opposition, her father's cryptic challenge. "So basically, you need to convince the guy who sees himself as your father's rightful heir to support policies that might diminish his own power," Gabriel summarized. "No pressure." Despite everything, Fiona laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds impossible." "Not impossible," he countered, "just challenging, and possibly requiring some creative approaches." "What do you mean?" Gabriel hesitated. "Look, during my internship, I had access to a lot of financial data. There were irregularities in how certain expenses were categorized. Nothing illegal exactly, but definitely designed to hide how much was being spent on executive perks versus worker compensation." Fiona sat up straighter. "Are you saying Gregory might be manipulating the numbers?" "I'm saying the numbers might not tell the whole story, and someone with the right access could find where the bodies are buried, so to speak," Gabriel explained, his voice lowering despite the phone connection. "Not that I'm suggesting anything questionable." "Of course not," Fiona replied, her mind racing with possibilities. "I'm just thinking about how to level the playing field with Gregory. If you need any help navigating the financial labyrinth, I'm pretty good with spreadsheets," Gabriel offered. "And I might still have some contacts in accounting who could point us in helpful directions." After they hung up, Fiona stared at the ceiling, conflicted. Was she prepared to dig into potentially damaging information about her own family's company? Could she use such leverage against her cousin, and by extension, her father? The ethical implications troubled her, but the stakes were too high to ignore any advantage. The next morning, Fiona arrived at Lancaster Industries headquarters earlier than usual. The committee meeting wasn't scheduled until the following week, giving her precious time to prepare. Instead of heading to her temporary office on the executive floor, she took the elevator down to the basement level where the records department was located. Mrs. Abernathy, the records manager who had worked for Lancaster Industries for over 30 years, looked up in surprise as Fiona entered. "Miss Lancaster, we don't often see executives down here in the dungeon," she said with a warm smile. "I'm not really an executive yet, Mrs. Abernathy," Fiona replied, returning the smile. "Just trying to learn everything I can about the company before my first committee meeting." "Well, what can I help you find?" Fiona hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I'm interested in employee turnover statistics for the past 5 years. Specifically, reasons for departure, tenure at time of leaving, and any exit interview data we might have. Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows rose slightly. That's not the kind of information most board members request. Usually, they just want the quarterly summaries. I'm not most board members, Fiona said simply. The older woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. No, I don't suppose you are. Your mother used to ask similar questions, you know. She lowered her voice. Before she got sick, she would come down here sometimes looking at the same kind of records. This revelation caught Fiona completely off guard. My mother? But she wasn't involved in the business. Mrs. Abernathy smiled sadly. Not officially, perhaps, but she cared about the people who worked here, said someone had to. She turned to her computer. Give me a few minutes to pull those files for you. As Fiona waited, her mind whirled with this new information. Had her mother been waging her own quiet battle against the company's practices? Had her illness cut short what might have been a similar journey to Fiona's current path? An hour later, Fiona sat in an unused conference room, surrounded by personnel files and spreadsheets. The patterns were even worse than she'd suspected. Not only was turnover alarmingly high among lower-level employees, but it spiked dramatically among women after maternity leave, among older workers, and among anyone who filed workplace injury claims. More disturbing were the exit interviews, or rather, the lack of them. Despite company policy requiring documentation of why employees left, over 60% of departures had no reason listed or were simply marked voluntary resignation with no further details. Fiona was so absorbed in the records that she didn't hear the door open. Finding anything interesting? She looked up to find Gregory standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of suspicion and disdain. Just doing my homework for the committee, Fiona replied calmly, though her heart was racing. You might try it. Gregory stepped into the room, glancing at the scattered papers. I've been with this company for 15 years, Fiona. I don't need to do homework to understand how it works. Then you already know about our dismal retention rates and the pattern of pushing out employees who become inconvenient. He shrugged. It's standard industry practice. People come and go. At twice the industry average rate, Fiona challenged, sliding a graph toward him. That costs us millions annually in training and lost productivity. Gregory barely glanced at it. Sentiment doesn't belong in business decisions. This isn't about sentiment, it's about sustainability. Fiona gathered her notes, deciding to retreat strategically rather than escalate the confrontation. But you'll hear all my arguments at the committee meeting. As she moved to leave, Gregory blocked her path slightly. You know, there's an easier way. You could withdraw your proposals, accept a ceremonial role on the board, and leave the actual running of the company to those of us who understand it. Fiona met his gaze steadily. And if I don't? Then you should be prepared for a fight you can't win, he said softly. Uncle George might be humoring you now, but he built this company on principles he won't abandon for your social justice crusade. We'll see about that, she replied, stepping around him. My father respects results, and I intend to deliver them. Walking away, Fiona felt Gregory's glare burning into her back. She had underestimated the intensity of his opposition. This wasn't just about business principles for him, but about his own position in the Lancaster hierarchy. If she succeeded in changing company culture, his influence would inevitably diminish. She had just made her first real enemy. The week that followed was a dizzying blur of research, meetings, and strategic planning. Fiona reached out to Gabriel, whose connections in accounting proved invaluable. Through careful, discreet questioning, they began piecing together a more complete picture of Lancaster Industries' operations, including some troubling discrepancies in how worker compensation was reported compared to executive benefits. Meanwhile, She met with Martin Chen, the young board member who had supported the formation of the committee, finding in him a cautious ally. As the first non-white executive in Lancaster's history, he understood better than most the importance of diversity and inclusion, values conspicuously absent from the company's current practices. "The old guard is watching you closely," he warned during their lunch meeting, "including your father. They're waiting for you to fail or give up." "And what do you think will happen?" Fiona asked. Martin smiled slightly. "I think they're underestimating you, but you need to be strategic about this fight. Pick your battles carefully." His advice led Fiona to refine her approach. Rather than pushing for all her proposed changes at once, she would focus on 3 key priorities: healthcare coverage for all full-time employees, a prohibition on firing pregnant workers, and a modest but meaningful wage increase for the lowest-paid workers. The night before the committee meeting, Fiona returned home late to find her father waiting in the living room, nursing a glass of scotch. "Long day?" he asked, as she dropped her briefcase on the sofa. "Just preparing," she replied, too tired for pretense. George nodded toward the briefcase. "Gregory tells me you've been investigating employee turnover rates." Of course, Gregory had reported her activities. Fiona should have expected as much. "Yes, the data is quite revealing." Her father swirled his scotch thoughtfully. "You know, when I started this company, turnover wasn't a concern. People were grateful for steady work, for the opportunity to provide for their families." "Times have changed," Fiona said gently, sitting across from him. "Today's workers have different expectations, different options." "Indeed," George set down his glass. "Your mother used to say something similar, that I was stuck in the past, unwilling to see how the world was changing around me." He looked directly at Fiona, his expression softening slightly. "She would be pleased to see you fighting this battle, even if I'm not entirely convinced it's a battle worth fighting." The admission, the closest her father had come to expressing support for her efforts, left Fiona momentarily speechless. "Thank you for telling me that," she said finally. George stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow's committee meeting won't be easy. Gregory has been building his case all week, and he has Harold Peterson firmly in his corner." As he left the room, Fiona called after him, "Whose corner are you in?" Her father paused but didn't turn around. "I'm in Lancaster Industries' corner, always have been." With that, he continued upstairs, leaving Fiona to ponder what exactly that meant for tomorrow's confrontation. The committee meeting the next morning was tense from the moment Fiona entered the conference room. Gregory and Harold Peterson were already there, heads together over a stack of documents. Martin Chen arrived shortly after Fiona, giving her a subtle nod of encouragement. 2 other board members, Victoria Winters and James Harrington, completed the committee, both unknown quantities in terms of where they might stand on her proposals. George Lancaster arrived last, taking his place at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said without preamble. "We're here to evaluate the proposals put forward by Miss Lancaster regarding employee benefits and compensation. Gregory, as CFO, you'll present the financial implications first." Gregory stood, distributing folders to each committee member. "Thank you, Uncle George. I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of the projected costs associated with these proposals." What followed was a meticulously crafted presentation designed to horrify fiscally conservative board members. Gregory outlined worst-case scenarios for each proposed change, inflated implementation costs, and glossed over potential long-term benefits. In conclusion, he finished with a satisfied smile, implementing these changes would cost Lancaster Industries an estimated $22 million over 3 years, with no guaranteed return on investment. It would reduce our competitiveness in the market and potentially necessitate layoffs, hurting the very workers Miss Lancaster claims to want to help. Fiona noticed her father watching her reaction carefully. This was the test he had set for her. How would she respond to this direct challenge? "Thank you for that creative interpretation of the numbers, Gregory," she began, rising from her seat. "Before I address the specific inaccuracies in your projections, I'd like to present some data that wasn't included in your analysis." She distributed her own folders containing the research she had compiled. Lancaster Industries currently spends approximately $8.3 million annually on employee turnover costs, recruiting, training, and lost productivity when positions remain unfilled. Our turnover rate of 42% is nearly double the industry average of 22%. She turned to a new slide. According to Exit interviews and employee surveys, the primary reasons for leaving are insufficient healthcare coverage, inadequate compensation, and poor work-life balance. Precisely the issues my proposals address. Victoria Winters, who had been silently examining both sets of documents, looked up. "These turnover figures can't be right. The quarterly reports show much lower numbers." "Because they only count formal resignations," Fiona explained. "They don't include workers who are pushed out after pregnancy, after workplace injuries, or through schedule manipulation that makes it impossible for them to continue working here." Gregory scoffed. "That's speculation, not data." "Actually," Fiona countered, "it's documented in HR records that aren't routinely shared with the board." She placed another document on the table, including this list of 27 women who were terminated within 6 months of returning from maternity leave over the past 3 years. The official reasons vary, but the pattern is unmistakable. Harold Peterson frowned. "This borders on accusing the company of discrimination, a serious charge, Miss Lancaster." "I'm not making accusations," Fiona said carefully. "I'm presenting facts that demonstrate why my proposals aren't just ethically sound, but financially prudent. If we reduce turnover by even 30% through improved benefits and wages, the savings would more than offset the costs Gregory has, somewhat generously, estimated." The discussion that followed was intense, with Gregory fighting every point and Harold backing him faithfully. But Fiona held her ground, supported occasionally by Martin, and to her surprise, Victoria Winters, who seemed increasingly troubled by the personnel practices being revealed. Throughout it all, George Lancaster remained mostly silent, his expression unreadable as he watched the debate unfold. Finally, after nearly 3 hours, he raised a hand to halt the discussion. "I think we've heard enough arguments for one day," he said. "It's clear that this is a complex issue with valid concerns on both sides." Gregory smiled triumphantly, assuming his uncle was about to table the proposals indefinitely. Instead, George continued, "Therefore, I propose a controlled test. We will implement Miss Lancaster's healthcare coverage improvement and wage adjustments at our Denver facility only for a trial period of 6 months. We'll compare turnover rates, productivity metrics, and overall costs with our similar facility in Detroit, which will maintain current policies." The room fell silent. It wasn't a complete victory for Fiona, but neither was it a rejection. It was a chance to prove her case with real data rather than projections. "If the Denver results show the benefits Miss Lancaster has projected, we'll consider expanding the policies company-wide," George concluded. "If they don't, we'll revert to current practices. Does the committee agree to this approach?" One by one, the members nodded, even Gregory, who clearly believed the experiment would fail. As the meeting adjourned, Fiona approached her father. "Thank you for the opportunity to prove my case." George regarded her thoughtfully. Don't thank me yet. You've made bold claims about what these changes will accomplish. Now you'll need to deliver results, and you'll have Gregory watching your every move, hoping you'll fail. I won't fail, Fiona said with quiet conviction. For your sake, I hope that's true. Her father gathered his papers. Because you've just staked your credibility on this experiment. If it doesn't succeed, your influence at Lancaster Industries will be finished before it truly begins. As Fiona left the building that afternoon, she felt both elated and terrified. She had won a crucial opportunity, but now came the harder part, making it work. Lives and livelihoods depended on her success, not to mention her own future at the company. Outside, she found Gabriel waiting. "I heard about the Denver trial," he said as they walked toward her car. "News travels fast around here." "It's a start," Fiona replied. "But now I have to make it succeed, despite whatever obstacles Gregory might put in my way." Gabriel hesitated. "About that, I've been offered a position at Lancaster Industries, in the Denver office, coincidentally." Fiona stopped walking. "What? When did this happen?" "Yesterday. Your father personally approved the hire." Gabriel looked almost embarrassed. "I wanted to tell you, but it all happened so quickly." "What position?" Fiona asked, suspicious of her father's motives. "Assistant Operations Manager. I'd be directly involved in implementing the new policies." Fiona's mind raced. Was this her father's way of helping her succeed by placing a potential ally in Denver? Or was it a setup, putting Gabriel in a position where his loyalty would be tested, forcing him to choose between his career and supporting her reforms? "You should take it," she decided aloud. "We need someone there who understands what we're trying to accomplish." Gabriel nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I was hoping you'd say that. I start next week." As they parted ways, Fiona couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Her father had given her a chance, yes, but on his terms, in a controlled environment where failure would discredit her permanently. The Denver experiment would determine not just the future of Lancaster Industries employees, but her own place within her family's legacy. Have you ever known someone who risked their personal or professional standing to fight for what they believed was right? I'd love to hear your experience in the comments. The next 3 months were the most intense of Fiona's life. She traveled between Chicago and Denver constantly, overseeing the implementation of the new policies, training managers on the changes, and personally addressing worker concerns. Against Gregory's predictions, morale improved almost immediately once the healthcare coverage expanded and wages increased. Employees who had been considering leaving decided to stay, and word spread quickly that Lancaster Industries' Denver facility was becoming a desirable place to work. But Gregory hadn't given up. Reports began reaching Fiona that he was pressuring Denver managers to cut corners, reduce hours, and find other ways to undermine the experiment's success. When those tactics didn't work, mysterious accounting errors started appearing in the Denver financial reports, inflating costs and minimizing productivity gains. Fortunately, Gabriel was perfectly positioned to document these discrepancies. His meticulous record-keeping provided Fiona with ammunition to counter Gregory's manipulations. The two spent long evenings reviewing figures, preparing rebuttals, and strategizing next steps, their professional relationship gradually warming into friendship. "He's getting desperate," Gabriel observed one night as they worked late in the Denver office. "These latest errors are so obvious, they're almost embarrassing." Fiona rubbed her tired eyes. "Desperation makes people dangerous. We need to be prepared for whatever he might try next." What she wasn't prepared for was a call from Rosa the following morning, her voice tight with urgency. "You need to come home, Nina. Your father collapsed during a meeting. They've taken him to Northwestern Memorial." Fiona caught the first flight back to Chicago, her mind racing with fear and guilt. Had the stress of the company conflicts contributed to her father's condition? Was she partly responsible? At the hospital, she found Rosa in the waiting room, her eyes red from crying. "The doctors say it was a minor stroke," the housekeeper explained. "He is stable now, but they are running tests." "Where's Gregory?" Fiona asked, knowing her cousin should have been notified. "He was here earlier, but left for an emergency board meeting." Rosa's expression darkened. "He called it himself, while your father was still unconscious." Alarm bells rang in Fiona's mind. A board meeting without the chairman. That's not protocol unless... She stopped, the realization hitting her. "Unless they're voting on temporary leadership during my father's recovery." Rosa nodded grimly. "I heard him on the phone. He was very enthusiastic about taking charge." Fiona checked her watch. The meeting would be starting in 30 minutes at Lancaster headquarters, just enough time to get there if she hurried. "Stay with him," she told Rosa. "Call me immediately if anything changes." "Where are you going?" "To stop Gregory from using my father's illness to seize control of the company." The Lancaster Industries boardroom was already filled when Fiona arrived, slightly breathless from rushing. Gregory stood at the head of the table, her father's place, addressing the assembled board members with practiced concern. "Necessary to maintain stability during this difficult time," he was saying. "As CFO and George's closest advisor, I'm prepared to assume temporary leadership responsibilities while he recovers." "That won't be necessary," Fiona announced from the doorway, causing all heads to turn. "My father's condition is stable, and his doctors expect a full recovery." Gregory's expression flickered between surprise and annoyance before settling into false sympathy. "Fiona, you should be at the hospital. We're just ensuring business continuity while Uncle George recuperates." "How thoughtful," Fiona replied coolly, taking a seat. "Though it's interesting that you felt this meeting couldn't wait until we had a complete medical assessment. Almost as if you were hoping to present the board with a fait accompli before all the facts were known." Harold Peterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We're all concerned about George's health, my dear. But the company needs leadership." "Absolutely," Fiona agreed, "which is why my father established clear succession protocols for situations exactly like this." She withdrew a document from her briefcase and slid it across the table. "The bylaws specify that in the event of the chairman's temporary incapacity, leadership decisions require a unanimous vote of the executive committee, which includes both Gregory and myself." Gregory's face tightened. He hadn't expected her to know the bylaws so thoroughly. This is about ensuring Lancaster Industries doesn't lose momentum at a critical time. The Denver experiment is already proving costly. "Actually," Fiona interrupted, "the preliminary results from Denver show a 24% reduction in turnover and a 9% increase in productivity compared to Detroit. I've brought the latest figures for everyone's review." She distributed folders containing the data she and Gabriel had prepared, watching as board members began examining the surprising results. "These numbers need verification," Gregory objected. "They contradict the financial reports I've received." "Interesting you should mention that," Fiona replied evenly. "We've documented several discrepancies in those financial reports. Errors that consistently made the Denver experiment appear less successful than it actually is." She met his gaze directly. "Errors that always seem to benefit a particular narrative." The implication hung in the air, causing several board members to exchange concerned glances. Victoria Winters broke the silence. "I think we should table any leadership decisions until George is able to provide input. And perhaps we should have an independent audit of these Denver results, given the conflicting information we're receiving." Gregory looked like he wanted to object, but realized he was losing ground. Of course, transparency is essential. Then we're agreed, Fiona said, rising from her seat. No leadership changes until my father's condition stabilizes, and an independent review of the Denver experiment data. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to return to the hospital. As bored, members filed out, murmuring among themselves. Gregory cornered Fiona near the door. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice tight with anger. "You may have blocked me today, but Uncle George won't be around forever. When the time comes, do you really think the board will choose you over me?" Fiona met his hostile gaze calmly. "I think they'll choose what's best for Lancaster Industries, and increasingly, that's not the path you represent." She left him standing there, seething, and hurried back to the hospital, where she found her father awake and alert, though visibly weakened. "The doctors say you were lucky," she told him, taking a seat beside his bed. "The stroke was mild, no permanent damage expected." George nodded slightly. "Where were you? Rosa said you rushed out." "I had to attend an emergency board meeting. Gregory called it while you were unconscious." Her father's expression darkened. "Let me guess, he was volunteering to take over during my incapacitation." "Something like that," Fiona confirmed. "I managed to postpone any decisions." A ghost of a smile touched George's lips. "Good girl, never let them see weakness." His voice was tired but determined. "This changes things, Fiona. I've been reconsidering my priorities lately. Even before this." He gestured to the hospital room around them. "What do you mean?" George's eyes, so like her own, studied her face. "I've been watching you these past months. Your commitment to the Denver project, your willingness to fight for what you believe is right." He paused. "You remind me of myself at your age, except your battle is more worthy than mine ever was." Fiona felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Dad," he raised a hand to stop her. "Let me finish. I built Lancaster Industries focused solely on growth and profit, believing that was the measure of success. Your mother tried to show me there were other metrics that mattered, human metrics. I didn't listen then." His voice grew softer. "But I'm listening now." The confession, coming from a man who had spent decades defending his hard-edged business practices, left Fiona momentarily speechless. "When I leave this hospital," George continued, "I want to accelerate the changes you've started, not just in Denver, but company-wide." Hope bloomed in Fiona's chest, but caution tempered it. "Gregory will fight us every step of the way, and he has allies on the board." "Let him fight," her father replied with a hint of his old steel. "We're Lancasters. We don't back down from a worthy battle." For the first time since she'd begun this journey, Fiona didn't feel alone in her mission. Her father might not agree with all her methods or motivations, but he was finally, genuinely on her side. It was a turning point she hadn't dared hope for. What neither of them realized was that Gregory, feeling increasingly cornered, was preparing a desperate countermove that would test not just the company's future, but the Lancaster family itself. 2 weeks later, George Lancaster was released from the hospital with orders to rest and reduce stress. Instead, he called an executive committee, meeting at the mansion, unwilling to wait any longer to address the company's direction. "The independent audit of the Denver experiment confirmed what Fiona has been reporting," he announced to the small group gathered in his home office. "Turnover reduced, productivity increased, employee satisfaction metrics significantly improved." Gregory, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since his failed power play, finally spoke. "One facility over 6 months isn't enough data to justify company-wide changes. The cost projections were wrong," George interrupted firmly. "Your projections, Gregory." He turned to the others. "I've decided to implement these policies across all Lancaster facilities, effective immediately." Victoria. Winters nodded approvingly. The audit results are compelling. I believe this is the right direction for the company. Harold Peterson, however, looked troubled. George, are you certain this isn't a hasty decision influenced by your recent health concerns? On the contrary, George replied, my health concerns have clarified my thinking. Lancaster Industries needs to evolve. These changes aren't just ethical, they're smart business. I have prepared implementation plans for each facility, Fiona added, distributing documents to everyone present. Based on what we learned in Denver, we can roll out these changes with minimal disruption. Gregory stood abruptly. I need to review these plans thoroughly before I can support them, if you'll excuse me. Without waiting for a response, he left the room, his departure radiating tension. Martin Chen watched him go with concern. He's not taking this well. You might want to watch your back, both of you. George dismissed the warning. Gregory will adapt, or he won't. Either way, we're moving forward. After the others left, Fiona lingered in her father's office. Dad, I think Martin is right. Gregory has too much invested in the old way of doing things. He won't accept this easily. Let me worry about Gregory, George said, looking tired but resolved. You focus on making these changes work. Over the following days, Fiona threw herself into planning the company-wide implementation of the new policies. Workers at all Lancaster. Facilities would soon have improved healthcare coverage, better wages, and protection from the arbitrary terminations that had previously been commonplace. She was so absorbed in the work that she almost missed the warning signs. Rosa mentioned seeing Gregory at the mansion when George was resting, engaged in a heated argument with him behind closed doors. Gabriel reported rumors of Gregory meeting privately with certain board members. But it wasn't until Jeffrey Williams, her father's assistant, approached her with obvious discomfort that Fiona realized how serious the threat had become. Miss Lancaster, I felt you should know. Mr. Gregory has been gathering financial records from before your father's time as CEO, records from the company's founding. Jeffrey lowered his voice. Records that were sealed by your grandfathers, lawyers decades ago. Fiona felt a chill of foreboding. What kind of records? Jeffrey shook his head. I don't know the details, but I overheard him telling Mr. Peterson that the information could change everything about how the board views the Lancaster legacy. That evening, Fiona confronted her father in his study, relating what Jeffrey had told her. George's reaction was unexpected, not anger or concern, but a deep, resigned sadness. I wondered if it would come to this, he said quietly, if he would go that far. Dad, what is he looking for? What's in those records? Her father was silent for a long moment, staring into the fireplace as if the answer might be found in the flames. The truth about how Lancaster Industries began, about the choices your grandfather made, choices I inherited and perpetuated. What choices? Fiona pressed, growing increasingly alarmed by her father's demeanor. George sighed heavily. Your grandfather built this company during the Depression by buying failing businesses at desperate prices. But it wasn't just opportunism. It was something darker. He would create the very conditions that forced those sales through methods that were questionable at best, criminal at worst. Fiona sank into a chair, struggling to process this revelation. And you knew about this? Not at first, her father admitted. By the time I took over, the worst practices had stopped. But the foundation of our wealth, of our position, it was built on that history. He met her eyes directly. I chose not to look too closely, not to question. It was easier to continue. The Lancaster tradition of prioritizing profit over people, just in more acceptable ways. And now Gregory is threatening to expose this history. George nodded grimly. If he can't stop our reforms through normal channels, he'll try to discredit us completely, make the Lancaster name toxic, force me to step down in disgrace. Would the board really turn against you over something your father did decades ago? It's not just what my father did. It's what I failed to do when I learned the truth. The fact that I built my career on that tainted foundation without ever making amends." George looked suddenly older, the weight of this hidden burden evident in his face. "Gregory knows this would destroy my reputation, and by extension yours." Fiona felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted. Everything she thought she knew about her family's legacy was being called into question, and yet, strangely, it made her even more determined to continue her fight for reform. "Then we have to face it," she said finally, "before Gregory can use it against us." "Face it," her father echoed, surprised by her response. "Yes, we acknowledge the past, all of it, the good and the bad. And we use it as further motivation to change Lancaster Industries' culture now." Fiona leaned forward intently. "This isn't about preserving the Lancaster name anymore. It's about transforming what it stands for." George stared at his daughter with growing admiration. "You truly are remarkable, Fiona. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." The mention of her mother sparked a question Fiona had never thought to ask before. Did she know about grandfather's history? "Yes," George said softly. "She discovered it accidentally, years into our marriage. It nearly destroyed us." His voice caught on the memory. "She wanted me to make it right then, to acknowledge the past and change how we operated. I refused. It was our greatest point of contention until her diagnosis made everything else seem insignificant." Fiona felt pieces of her family history clicking into place. Her mother's subtle resistance to certain aspects of the Lancaster lifestyle, her efforts to instill different values in her daughter, her quiet sadness that Fiona had never fully understood. "We'll make it right now," Fiona promised, taking her father's hand. "Together." George squeezed her hand gratefully. "Gregory won't expect us to address this voluntarily. He thinks it's leverage he can use to force our compliance." "Then we'll surprise him," Fiona said with growing conviction. "We'll call a full board meeting and lay everything out. The past mistakes, the current reforms, and our vision for a Lancaster Industries built on integrity rather than exploitation." It was a risky strategy, potentially catastrophic for the company's reputation and their personal standing. But it was also their best chance to neutralize Gregory's threat and continue the transformation they had begun. The following Monday, the Lancaster Industries boardroom was filled with confusion and curiosity. George had called an emergency meeting without specifying the agenda, leaving board members to speculate about its purpose. Gregory arrived last, his expression a mixture of smugness and suspicion. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," George began, standing at the head of the table with Fiona beside him. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that what I'm about to share may change how you view Lancaster Industries and the Lancaster family. It may even change your willingness to remain associated with us." The room grew silent, tension thickening. The air. For decades, certain aspects of this company's founding have remained hidden, buried in sealed records and confidential agreements. George's voice was steady despite the gravity of his words. "Today, that changes." Gregory shifted uncomfortably, clearly thrown by this unexpected approach. Over the next hour, George Lancaster detailed his father's ruthless business tactics. During the company's early years, the predatory practices, the manipulation of vulnerable business owners, the deliberate creation of hardship to facilitate cheap acquisitions. He acknowledged his own complicity in maintaining a corporate culture built on those foundations, even after he became aware of the truth. "I tell you this not to seek absolution," he concluded, "but because you deserve to know the full history of the company you help govern. And because Lancaster Industries is at a crossroads." Fiona stepped forward. "The reforms we've begun in Denver aren't just good business decisions, though the data proves they are. They're the first steps in redefining what the Lancaster name stands for. Not exploitation, but empowerment. Not profit at any cost, but prosperity that includes everyone who contributes to our success. The board members sat in stunned silence, trying to process these revelations. Harold Peterson was the first to speak, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You've deliberately concealed information that shareholders had a right to know. This could expose the company to significant legal liability. Most potential legal claims are well beyond any statute of limitations," Fiona countered. "But we're prepared to establish a restitution fund for families or businesses that can document harm from the company's early practices." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Such an admission of culpability was unprecedented and potentially expensive. Gregory finally found his voice. "This is outrageous! You're willing to bankrupt the company over ancient history?" He turned to the other board members. They've both lost perspective, first with these unsustainable worker benefits, and now with this self-flagellation over actions none of us had any part in. Victoria Winters raised her hand. "Actually, I have questions about the Denver results that might be relevant here." She turned to Fiona. "You've claimed the new policies improved productivity and reduced turnover. Do you have updated figures since the independent audit?" "I do," Fiona replied, grateful for the shift to concrete data. She distributed new reports showing continued improvements across all metrics at the Denver facility. What followed was a vigorous debate about the company's future, its ethical obligations, its financial prospects, and its leadership. Throughout it all, George and Fiona presented a united front, answering difficult questions honestly and emphasizing their commitment to transforming Lancaster Industries from the inside out. Gregory fought them at every turn, portraying their proposals as naive idealism that would destroy the company's competitive edge. But with each objection, it became increasingly clear that his primary concern was not Lancaster Industries' welfare, but his own position within it. After nearly 3 hours of intense discussion, Martin Chen called for a vote. "I move that we formally adopt the reforms implemented in Denver across all Lancaster facilities and establish the restitution fund as proposed by the Lancasters." Gregory jumped to his feet. "This is premature. We need time to consider the financial implications, to consult legal counsel." "We've been discussing these reforms for months," Victoria Winters countered. "The Denver results speak for themselves, and as for the historical issues, I believe addressing them proactively, as George and Fiona suggest, is the most prudent course of action." The vote was called. One by one, board members made their decisions. Harold Peterson voted against, loyal to Gregory to the end. 2 others abstained, unwilling to commit either way. But the remaining 5, including Victoria and Martin, voted to support the Lancasters' vision. Gregory's face flushed with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed, gathering his papers. "The shareholders will never accept this reckless direction." "Perhaps you underestimate them," George replied calmly. "Just as you've underestimated the value of doing what's right rather than what's merely profitable." Nay, after Gregory stormed out, the remaining board members worked through the details of implementing the new policies company-wide. The restitution fund would be managed by an independent committee, ensuring transparency and fairness. A public statement would acknowledge the company's problematic origins while emphasizing its commitment to a more ethical future. As the meeting concluded, board members approached George and Fiona individually, many expressing newfound respect for their courage in confronting the past so directly. "That couldn't have been easy," Victoria told Fiona as they left the boardroom. "Facing your family's history like that, many would have fought to keep it buried." "Buried things have a way of resurfacing eventually," Fiona replied. "Better to confront them on our own terms." Outside, She found Gabriel waiting, having come to Chicago when he heard about the emergency board meeting. "How did it go?" he asked anxiously. Fiona's tired smile told him everything. "We won. The reforms are going company-wide." His face lit up with genuine joy. "That's incredible, but Gregory is furious and planning his next move," she finished. "But for today, let's just celebrate this victory." That evening, the Lancaster mansion hosted an unusual gathering. For the first time in years, the formal dining room was filled not with business associates or social connections, but with people who had been invisible to the family for too long. Rosa sat at the table alongside other long-serving staff members. Mr. Reynolds, the chauffeur who had been fired for caring for his sick daughter, had been rehired and was present with his now healthy child. Mrs. Kennedy, the former housekeeper, who had been dismissed after 20 years, returned as an honored guest. George Lancaster raised a glass. "To new beginnings," he said simply, "and to the wisdom to learn from our past without being imprisoned by it." As Fiona looked around the table, she saw something she hadn't witnessed in this house since her mother's death: genuine warmth and community. The dividing lines between employers and employees, between the Lancaster family and those who served them, were beginning to blur into something more humane, more authentic. Later that night, she found her father in his study, looking at an old photograph of her mother. "She would have loved this evening," he said without looking up. "It's what she always wanted for this family: connection beyond obligation, relationships beyond transactions." Fiona sat beside him. "Why was it so hard to see all these years?" George shook his head slowly. "Power blinds us, Fiona. Privilege creates walls we don't even realize we're building." He put the photograph down carefully. "Your mother saw it, and now you do too." "We both do," she corrected gently. Her father nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "It's not going to be easy, this new path. Gregory will fight us every step of the way. Some shareholders will resist the changes. There will be financial challenges as we adjust. But it's the right path," Fiona said with conviction, "and that makes it worth fighting for." In the months that followed, Lancaster Industries underwent a transformation that few would have thought possible a year earlier. The company-wide implementation of better wages and benefits initially reduced quarterly profits, as Gregory had warned. But by the end of the first year, turnover had decreased dramatically across all facilities. Productivity had risen. Employee satisfaction scores reached record highs. More surprisingly, the company's public acknowledgement of its problematic past and its commitment to restitution earned unexpected goodwill. Business schools began using Lancaster Industries as a case study in ethical corporate evolution. New customers, particularly younger ones concerned with corporate social responsibility, sought out Lancaster products. Gregory ultimately left to start his own venture, taking Harold Peterson and a few other old guard executives with him. His departure, rather than weakening Lancaster Industries, allowed for fresh perspectives in the executive ranks. Fiona found herself surrounded by allies who shared her vision of a company that valued people as much as profits. The transformation wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks and compromises, but with each challenge, the company emerged stronger and more aligned with its new values. On the one-year anniversary of her confrontation with her father in his study, the moment that had started this journey, Fiona found herself in that same room, now serving as her own office within the mansion. George had begun a phased retirement, gradually transferring more responsibilities to his daughter while remaining available for guidance. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. Rosa entered, carrying a small package. "This came for you, Nina," she said, placing it on the desk. "From your father." Curious, Fiona opened it to find a simple silver picture frame. Inside was a photograph she had never seen before. Her mother, standing proudly outside the original Lancaster factory, her expression determined and hopeful. On the back, her father had written a message. She always believed in what Lancaster Industries could become. Now, thanks to you, it finally has. With pride and love, Dad. Tears blurred Fiona's vision as she traced her fingers over her mother's image. She had begun this journey seeking to right specific wrongs, to help workers who were being mistreated. Along the way, she had healed old wounds within her family, reconnected with her father, and honored her mother's memory in the most meaningful way possible. The mansion no longer felt like a museum where emotions were kept behind glass. It had become a home, and Lancaster Industries had become the kind of company where people were valued, where humanity trumped profit margins, where success was measured in more than just financial terms. As Fiona placed the photograph on her desk, she glanced out the window to see Gabriel arriving for their strategy meeting. Their professional collaboration had blossomed into something deeper over the past year, another unexpected gift from this journey of transformation. Her father's words from months earlier echoed in her mind. The things most worth doing rarely are easy. The path she had chosen hadn't been easy, but it had been unquestionably worth it. Not just for the Lancaster legacy, but for every life touched by the changes she had fought for. Some called her rebellious, some called her idealistic, but Fiona Lancaster knew the truth. She was simply being the kind of leader the world needed more of. One who understood that true success came not from what you accumulated, but from the positive difference you made in people's lives. And in that understanding, she had found her own definition of heroism. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments, so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.